I want you to do something uncomfortable with me right now. I want you to hold two facts in your head at the same time and resist the urge to reconcile them too quickly. Fact 1. The United States has the largest defense budget in human history, $886 billion in fiscal year 2025. 11 carrier strike groups, 700 overseas military installations across 80 countries. No nation in recorded history has ever projected military power at this scale. Fact 2. On June 22, 2026, the United States signed a Memorandum of Understanding in which it agreed to release frozen Iranian assets, lift oil export sanctions, end a maritime blockade, and fund a reconstruction program before a single conversation about Iran's nuclear program has taken place. Hold both of those facts at the same time. Now tell me which one is more important. Because here is what I think is happening. Not just in Switzerland today, but in the broader arc of American power since roughly 2001. And to explain it, I'm not going to start with Iran. I'm not going to start with nuclear physics or oil markets or the Strait of Hormuz. I'm going to start with the most important question a strategist can ask. Not are we winning, but what game are we actually playing? There is a concept in Roman military history that most people have never encountered, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The Romans called it feudus iniquum, an unequal treaty, and the Romans were brilliant at it. Not as victims, as architects. In the 2nd century BC, Rome used unequal treaties to extend its influence without the cost of direct conquest. You sign a treaty with a smaller power. The smaller power gets recognition, protection, trade access. Rome gets compliance, strategic behavior modification, and a client state that believes it made a free choice. The genius of feudus iniquum is that the weaker party often didn't understand what they had agreed to until years later when Rome called in the terms. Here is the question I want you to sit with as we go through what happened today. Which party in Switzerland signed the feudus iniquum? Because I think most American commentators are so fluent in the narrative of American power that they have read this agreement as Rome reading it. The strong extending favourable terms to the weak, and I think that reading is not just wrong, I think it is precisely backwards. Let me walk you through a concept that I want to call strategic patience asymmetry. It sounds technical, it isn't. It's actually very simple, and it explains more about international relations than most graduate seminars. Strategic patience asymmetry is what happens when one party in a conflict needs a resolution more urgently than the other. Think about what this looks like in practice. When you're buying a car and the salesperson knows you need it by Monday, for a job interview, for a family situation, for a trip you've already committed to, they stop negotiating. They wait, because your deadline is doing their work for them. Now map that onto the last 4 months of American foreign policy. The United States launched Operation Epic Fury on February 28th, with what the administration described as limited, targeted, time-sensitive objectives. Destroy nuclear infrastructure. Degrade missile capability. Signal resolve. Done. But here's what the planners did not account for, or if they did account for it, they did not plan for it adequately. Iran did not cooperate with the timeline. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, and the Strait of Hormuz is not a military target. You cannot bomb a choke point open when the country controlling that choke point is willing to absorb the counterattack and keep mining the waters. The American military is the most powerful kinetic force in human history. But kinetic force is a solution to a specific category of problem. Destroy this, capture that, suppress them. It is not, and this is the part that I think was catastrophically misunderstood in the planning phase. It is not a solution to geography. Iran's leverage was never its military capability relative to America's. That comparison is absurd. Iran's leverage was a 21-mile-wide channel through which 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas flows every single day. Japan, South Korea, Germany, India. Every one of those countries was watching oil prices climb past $120 per barrel and quietly, diplomatically, but unmistakably sending the same message to Washington. Resolve this. And that message, from allies, from markets, from the mathematical certainty of a global recession, created a deadline. An American deadline. That Iran did not share. That asymmetry is the whole story. Let me introduce you to something I call the concession gradient. It is the mechanism by which strategic patience asymmetry converts into diplomatic outcomes. And it is running in perfect form right now. The concession gradient works like this. When one party has a harder deadline than the other, the party with the deadline makes the first concession. The first concession signals urgency. Urgency signals desperation. Desperation depresses your negotiating position. Every subsequent offer comes from a weaker starting point than the one before. The gradient slopes only one direction. Go back and read the sequence of American positions over the last 4 months in the Iran negotiations. In March, the American position was full dismantlement of enrichment infrastructure, intrusive IAEA inspections, no uranium enriched above 5%, immediate ballistic missile program limitations, and regional proxy disarmament as a condition of any economic normalization. In April, the American position had evolved. Enrichment could continue at limited levels. Proxy disarmament was decoupled and moved to a separate track. The question of ballistic missiles was flagged for parallel technical discussions. In May, the framework being circulated privately conceded that some level of domestic enrichment was a red line for Iran's domestic political situation and would need to be accommodated. Today in Switzerland, 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% sits untouched inside Iranian territory, and the treaty document says discussions about that material will begin at a date to be agreed. After the United States has already delivered every economic concession Iran demanded. That is a concession gradient, 4 months, one direction. And here is the part that should trouble you most. This gradient did not happen because American diplomats were outmatched intellectually. Many of them are extraordinarily capable people. It happened because the structure of the situation, the oil price, the Allied pressure, the three-front resource strain, the domestic political timeline, created a deadline that Iran did not have. And Iran, with extraordinary discipline, simply waited. I want to give you a frame now that I think is missing entirely from the mainstream coverage of this agreement. Most analysis is focused on what was agreed. I want to focus on what was demonstrated, because here is something that military and diplomatic strategists understand deeply. The signal a negotiated outcome sends is often more consequential than the terms of the agreement itself. What did the outcome in Switzerland demonstrate? First, it demonstrated that Iran's mosaic defense doctrine, the distributed, decentralized, redundant military architecture it has been building for 20 years, specifically in anticipation of an American first strike, worked. Not perfectly, not without enormous cost to Iran, but it worked well enough. The center did not collapse. The system adapted. That demonstration is now data. China saw it. Russia saw it. Every state that has been contemplating how to resist American military pressure just received a real-world case study in how to do it. Second, it demonstrated something about American decision-making coherence that I think is more alarming than the specific terms of the treaty. While American negotiators were in the room in Switzerland working through the night, and I want to be clear, these were serious professionals, doing serious work. The President of the United States was posting social media threats that caused the Iranian delegation to walk out of the joint session. Let me be precise about what happened and what it means. Iran used that walkout. They used it as a renegotiation lever. They stepped out, let Qatar and Pakistan absorb the pressure, re-entered having extracted additional concessions on implementation language, and did all of this while appearing to be the aggrieved party reacting to American provocation. That is not improvisation. That is a rehearsed move. You only have that move available if you have correctly assessed in advance that your counterpart's internal coordination is poor enough that you can reliably generate a provocation simply by waiting. Iran read the American decision-making structure accurately. They built that reading into their negotiating strategy, and it paid out. Now I want to do something rigorous because I think rigorous thinking requires you to seriously engage with the strongest version of the argument you're skeptical of. Here is the best case for what America agreed to today. 1. The alternative was not a better negotiated outcome. The alternative, given the oil price, the Allied fracture, the ammunition constraints that led to the pause in Taiwan arms sales, was potentially a much worse negotiated outcome, or a wider war with catastrophic economic consequences. A deal, even a disadvantageous deal, ends the bleeding. 2. The 60-day technical track is not nothing. It brings experts into a room. It creates a structure. And a structure, even an imperfect one, is harder to blow up than a void. The void was costing the world economy hundreds of billions of dollars a week. 3. Iran's internal politics are not monolithic. There are factions that want economic normalization. Economic normalization, if it comes, strengthens those factions against the Revolutionary Guard hardliners. A recovering economy is not automatically a more aggressive state. Sometimes it's a more cautious one. These are real arguments. I'm not dismissing them. But here is what the Steelman case cannot explain. On day 61, the morning after the 60-day window closes, Iran will have its oil revenue flowing, its frozen assets accessible, its reconstruction fund commitments in place, and 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium still sitting, inspected by no one, in facilities that nobody outside Iran has seen. What leverage does the United States have at that table? The sanctions were the leverage. The blockade was the leverage. The frozen assets were the leverage. Those instruments were the hand America was holding. That hand has been played. It has been surrendered in exchange for a calendar appointment. The JCPOA, the 2015 nuclear agreement that the first Trump administration withdrew from, which set off this entire spiral, was constructed on the opposite principle. Verify, then reward. Iran demonstrates compliance. Inspectors confirm it. Then relief. That sequencing existed for a reason. It existed because the economic benefits, once delivered, cannot be retrieved. Today's agreement reverses that sequencing. And unlike a card game where you can fold and wait for a better hand, the cards that were surrendered today cannot be picked back up. Let me give you 3 things to watch in the coming days, because I think forward-looking analysis is more useful than retrospective critique. First, watch the implementation language coming out of the technical teams in Bergenstock. Iran's deputy foreign minister stayed behind with a technical team after the signing. What they argue about over the next 72 hours. The specific definitions of sanction waivers, the timelines on asset releases, the precise scope of the non-interference clause. We'll tell you more about whether Iran is using this agreement as a genuine off-ramp or as a structured delay. Maximalist demands on implementation language means delay. Pragmatic compromise means something like sincerity. Second, watch Lebanon. The deconfliction mechanism for Lebanon is the most operationally fragile part of this agreement. Israel's defense minister notably avoided saying anything about offensive operations, while saying Israeli forces would remain in southern Lebanon. That gap between we're staying and we're not striking is where this agreement is most likely to break before it formally begins. Any significant Israeli military action in the next week gives Iran a documented ceasefire violation to point at. They will use it. Third, and I want to be direct about this, watch the American president's social media account. I do not say that sarcastically. Iran demonstrated today that they have a playbook for converting presidential posts into negotiating leverage. That playbook works. They will run it again. Every threat posted, every piece of all-caps foreign policy conducted by phone gives Iran a documented provocation to point at when they slow-walk their own compliance commitments. The greatest ongoing risk to this agreement is not Iran's Revolutionary Guard. It is the gap between the people in the room and the person with the account. Here is what I want you to sit with at the end of all of this. America went to war with an objective: prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. America ended that war, at least this phase of it, having agreed to a process that will begin in 60 days to discuss maybe what to do about 440 kilograms of uranium that is already enriched to near weapons grade and which nobody outside Iran has inspected. That is not the objective. That is almost precisely the opposite of the objective. And the coverage from every major outlet is calling it a diplomatic achievement because oil prices came down, because the Strait is opening, because the immediate crisis has a 60-day ceiling. All of that is true. The immediate crisis is less acute than it was yesterday. But there is a Rome-Carthage question underneath all of this that nobody is asking loudly enough. When Rome finally agreed to terms with Carthage after the First Punic War, after enormous military expenditure, after years of brutal fighting, Carthage retained its army, retained its navy, retained its territory, and Rome extracted a war indemnity. 23 years later, Carthage under Hannibal crossed the Alps. The peace was real. For 23 years it was real. But the peace was also a pause, a structured, documented, internationally recognised pause, in a contest that had not actually been resolved. The question for the next 60 days, and honestly for the next decade, is whether what was signed in Switzerland today is the end of a conflict or a structured pause in one. And the answer to that question will not come from press conferences. It will come from what Iran does on day 61, when it is sitting across the table from a country that has already played its hand. Read the joint statement from Pakistan and Qatar published today, then read Iran's foreign minister's statement on his Telegram channel. Compare how each side describes what was achieved. You will find that the Iranians describe what they received in concrete, specific, verifiable terms. You will find the mediators describe the outcome in the language of process and possibility. That gap, between what was received and what was promised is where the next 60 days will live. I'll see you there.